I'm LouisVerbeke. I'm a professor at Vlery School and also the chairman of the Vlery School. And I got up very early this morning to speak to your participants of the program LeadersAngle about what I called humongous change. And we have been talking about how we should look differently at governance, at ethics, at best practices in business, and in short, about changes that would affect all of us. The reality of what we've been doing is, what I've been doing is based on the simple idea that being entrepreneurial is being, in fact, not happy with the state of the art of what you're doing, and very unreasonably trying to do something about it. You know, that's what entrepreneurs do. I've put two words down there. Most of you can probably not read it, but I read it down there so I can remember them, because it's early in the morning and my, memory doesn't function yet at full speed. There are two Indian words, and it is niti here, and this is the APPA. Right. And I've, of course, studied a bit on the history of law, and all law, your law, my law, all goes back to the Indians. 3,800 years ago, a system that still exists today, Hindu law. And it basically, what it says is, the system that we build, the ethical system, the social system, societal system, is based on the niti. Right? That's the institutional stuff. That's how we hold the elections. That's how we appoint the governments. That's how we approve our laws. That's the structure, the institutional stuff. Right? But if you want to grow, if you want to improve your societal environment, is the nyapa. That's very important. And the nyapa is the emerging change, the tension between today and tomorrow, which you already need to have in your minds if you want to think in the future, but isn't yet sufficiently accepted to be transformed into the institutional part. And in that tension between what you need to preserve as an institution in order to have order and everything else, and that nyapa, what you need to already question of the existing stuff, that societies who handle that well are basically growing, are blossoming. And that's the basis of my little talk today. I call this humongous change, and of course humongous is itself a new word, which has been invented. It's somewhere in the streets of one of the other American cities. And it means really something totally huge and unanticipated. That's really what it was. And of course, it's a consequence of the financial crisis. And, I've seen all sorts of things and been reading a lot of it and a few books about it since. A lot of the books are, of course, not interesting. Sadly, you have to read a lot of books in order to find one that's truly interesting. But that's part of the job. I've seen articles that are really stupendous. You obviously, the Financial Times. I read it every morning. That's sort of replaced the Bible in my house. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not annoying anybody. But the Financial Times is something you start your day with. I used to know the Financial Times is a pretty, conservative, kind of pro-city paper. And, the titles in the Financial Times were the end of the Anglo-Saxon system. Right? It's as if, and there were titles like that all over the place. I mean, literally saying, this is the end of an era. Right? This is the end of America as we know it. This is the end of, the banking system as we know it. This is the end of the euro, of course. I mean, that's, give an Englishman half a chance, and he will end the euro. You know, that's the dream of that. You know, and the end of everything, basically. But, and it's, you know, of course, all of this is exaggerated. These reactions as a consequence of events are always exaggerated. They're always over to it. But I do think, ladies and gentlemen, there are some changes to be expected. In fact, you know, the exam for my students for my course is a very simple one. You will read, as the Germans would say. Every morning, you will read the Financial Times. And you will agree, just 4 students, you know, little groups of 4, which event is likely to influence future business behavior. Right? You'll select one, and you'll present that to the class, and then we'll discuss that. Right? In short, the purpose of the course is to learn, to teach you to relate to events. Right? You know, when Lord Balfour was appointed Prime Minister of England, somewhere in Victorian times, I think, you know, early 19th century, no, 20th century, I think. He, you know, a journalist asked him what he was most afraid of as a future Prime Minister. And his answer was, events, sir, events. In short, what you should be worried about is what you cannot predict. Everything else is a matter of homework. It's what you cannot predict that you should be worried about. It's what you didn't know. Right? And this is exactly, I think, what happens here, you know, in this crisis. Things happen that nobody had ever anticipated. We can see the signs. We don't see their meaning. Right? We, as business schools, train people into the best practice of the moment. We don't teach them to recognize change in time for them to reconsider best practice. You know, we have failed doing so. We have assumed that we could find an academic truth that would carry us through changing times. Right? We've often taught people we haven't, you know, we've presented them with the result of our academic cooking, but we haven't shared the sources with them in such a way that they would be able to anticipate the requirements for new kinds of cooking. Right? That, in short, we need to share with our students a lot more in terms of environment, in terms of what many would call political science, where you can, you know, you can act and see and understand change much more quickly than after the classic way in which economists do it, which is basically, you know, waiting until they have the statistics, then write it out, and then see 20 years later that the statistics were wrong, and accordingly the theory is unacceptable. Right? That's how it works, and I hope there are not too many economists in the room. If so, you can always beat me up, but wait until the end of the session. We have been told there is only one good model, governance model in the world, and that's the American one. Basically, if you grow, one, you have to list as soon as possible. Being listed is better than not being listed. Right? 2, we've been told that once you're listed, you must get rid of your controlling shareholder or majority shareholder as soon as possible so that professional management can take over. Right? And so they can start raising their bonuses in runaway with the wealth of that company, right? That wasn't really written down in the best practice, but that's what it happens. Basically, you create a system where there is unfettered power, as the English put it well, you know, granted to a group of agents, and obviously when there is unfettered power granted to agents, then the agents will abuse that power. That's the reality, and that's the reality in the corporate world as well as in the political world. You know, the reality today is that we have revived the other systems, and you know, you can see that you know, Warren Buffett, for example, you know, he's not in favor of that system. He's done rather well for himself, you would agree, and for his shareholders. You know, he believes in, you know, keeping management under control, under check. You know, Bill Gates controls 36% of Microsoft, and you haven't seen any crazy bonuses at Microsoft, as far as I recall. Google controls 75% of the voting power with 12% of the shares of the company. You know, they're not going to let their management run wild, you know, and so on. So we are reviving old ideas. So re-regulation is definitely enormous change, and re-regulation is, of course, increasingly now transatlantic. That means between the EU and America. You know, it is a bit crazy that a bank, which is active on both sides, should basically do bad in one, you know, look for freedom to do whatever it wants in London and be highly regulated in New York, which is presently happening. So the business moves, of course, to the rather less regulated place. So we all see that a lot of things will need to be done there. When you talk about ethics, I always start with telling my students the purpose of my course is to keep you out of jail. And I'm not joking. They always start with completing 18 short cases. And I would guess, on the basis of what they, you know, completed on the short cases, about 60% of them deserve to go to jail. They really do. And this is not, you know, particularly to the alumni or the students of the radio school, because they've done it for other institutions as well. So I don't think the Flemings have a particularly criminal mind, you know. It's simply that the unawareness of the management class about the risks they take, both personal and in financial terms, is simply incredible. What people don't understand either is that, especially people from traditional legal systems like yours and mine, is that law is a much more broader concept than, you know, something voted by Parliament, any Parliament. It is a concept that goes towards much soft law. That means, you know, industry codes, OECD codes. It goes to NGOs acting as prosecutors and as judges and juries, and they are sometimes right. You know, they also act as auditors. In fact, APPA, just a couple of days ago, eliminated this, you know, put an end to the contracts with 2 of its suppliers for violating the supply chain rules. So we're getting there in a world which is changing very rapidly, in the sense that voids are being filled with all sorts of, you know, quote, rules, you can call it law, which, you know, is not the law of the traditional kind, the kind we're used to. And accordingly, I tell my students, you should read the reports of Amnesty International. In fact, there's a big report that's come out about South Africa, which makes for interesting reading. I've got it with me. You know, you should read that. I mean, what happens there, you know, is perhaps even more important than the laws that are voted by the South African Parliament. So that's the world we try to uncover. It is imprecise. It is incredibly messy. I mean, messiness is the word I use most. In fact, my dean tells me I teach the unteachable, right? So I'll stop here, since it's unteachable anyway.